Hello and welcome. In this episode, we're going to talk about the ongoing attacks against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, about the ongoing Ukrainian offensives, counteroffensives, and about more theories when it comes to who and how was the Kerch Bridge attacked. The Russian Air Force was flying additional attacks against civilian and infrastructural targets within Ukraine. Among those were the usage of roughly or almost 3 dozen Kh-101. That's an extremely modern Russian cruise missile with a range of 3 to 4,000 kilometers, even stealth features, which would indicate they might be running short on missiles again, as they are now using those missiles that seem completely over-dimensioned, like too big, too high value for the targets that were actually attacked. But that's more or less interpretation, not really fact in this regard. When it comes to the information about Belarus, we have further reports about deliveries of ammunition and potentially of heavy weapons like Tor M1 and T-72 out of Belarus into Russia. The ammunition is confirmed to a certain degree by visual images. The heavy weapons are not fully, but all of this indicates that Belarus is not intending to invade Ukraine anytime soon, because you wouldn't empty your storage if you're about to enter a war. Russia has said that it took prisoners all over, like it captured Ukrainian terrorists, as they called them, all in several cities inside of Russia. It is to be like, there's some speculation that Russia is framing these arrests, whether they are justified or just staged, as terrorism to preemptively declare Ukraine to be a terrorist supporter before other nations declare Russia to be a terrorist supporter, of which there is quite a significant initiative in the international diplomacy as of now. There was the vote in the UN General Assembly about the annexation of territories within Ukraine. Here you see who voted in favor and who voted against, and who left an abstention. We see massive nations that are either within the CSTO that abstain, or that are buying weapons from Russia in big amounts. For instance, Algeria is one of the nations that doesn't want to harm its defense ties with, and India. Both those nations would be nations that don't want to harm their defense ties with Russia. But at the same time, we see, for instance, Egypt, that it has voted here. Egypt has voted for the calling it illegal, and to recognize Ukraine's international border. So there are some nations with really good relationships, prior good relationships, also the United Arab Emirates, that are now voting against Russia in this regard. Interesting too that some of the nations that didn't show up, among them Iran, for instance, could be seen as interesting, and the nations that were supporting Russia's annexation are the usual suspects of those that are supporting them: Belarus, the People's Republic of Korea, so North Korea, Russia itself, Nicaragua, and Syria. Even Eritrea this time did not vote for it. As we can see, it abstained. So the support is, Russia's support is even there, going down now. Riba is showing here a map. I want to start with this when it comes to the Ukrainian attacks in the direction of Svatove and Crimea. Riba is a pro-Russian source, which makes always high quality, like from the optics, high quality maps. But according to the information I have found for you, it is that Russian military bloggers are now writing of up to 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers that are establishing footholds. They are getting ready to further the attacks to the east in this region here. We have reports that the Ukrainians have now reached Volshana, which was, where was it? Fortunate. I can't find it really quick. Let me just quickly. Okay. That's unfortunate now that I don't find it anymore, but we have more or less the reports of the Ukrainian pushing here. And also, no, this is Vilshana. Vilshana was it, not Volshana. I guess I did a typo here. Vilshana, which is I and O is directly next to each other. I want to apologize for that. So they have reached here. We don't have reports of them capturing it yet. The Russians say they defeated Ukrainian attacks on Kislivka and Olyanka. Which we see here and here. So there's also pushing further east here. Any rumors about a supposed encirclement in Kislivka have not materialized. That's why I usually don't report those by now, as we have heard so many claims of encirclements and everyone inside being destroyed without ever seeing a single proof for that it doesn't seem worth the time mentioning those unless they are actually proven to exist. We have now reports that the Russians are actually doing counterattacks. That much is clear now. In the last situation report, I mentioned the Russian claims that they've reached Terny and Torske, so that they are attacking strongly in the western direction from Crimea. We now hear the Ukrainians say they defeated an attack on Novosadove here. So they're actually pushing in this direction as of now. We have no confirmation of any of the towns here along this line being captured, though. But what seems to be clear is that they actually pushed the Ukrainians a few kilometers back further east. Also, the Russians claim they have full control over the road between Crimea and Svatove. This I can't confirm, but from the Ukrainian claims in the past, they only had like sabotage troops, deep recon, etc. in that area, not really combat troops that were supposed to capture and hold territory. So in this regard, there's not that much of a change, except that the Russians now claim they can use the road at will, more or less. We have interesting videos now of Russian usage of Lancet 3 kamikaze drones that are being published by the Ministry of Defense. That is interesting insofar as we now have videos of those and from different angles where you see the targeting drone and the drone itself. You see the attack here hitting a tank. I think it should have been a T-64. I'm not completely sure. See another tank, and here actually the camera from inside of the drone while it attacks it, but as we can see, it seems to have hit a tree here. And that looks like a Humvee to me that is being targeted here, and you can see the soldiers running as soon as they hear the sound of the drone closing in. Further here against a, what is that? Looks like a civilian car in usage. Yeah, like a civilian car. Again, the soldiers are running away. Interesting videos in this regard because it shows something new, but and also the Russians themselves using drones that are not purely Iranian, that they still using their own drones in this regard. We have further reports about Russian attacks against against Soledar and Bakhmutske. That's now down here on the front line close to Bakhmut. They are still pushing in this direction. We have also reports about fighting around Bakhmut, but there is not a single proof of Russians having actually entered the city proper. What we have heard is that supposedly the Russians had captured Ivanrad, but a Ukrainian counterattack pushed them back and is now in control. The Ukrainians are now back in control of the town. But regardless of that, we can see here that the distance of Ivanrad to more or less the center, like the front line, is now within 5 kilometers of the center of Bakhmut, which is now being threatened from two sides already, from the south and from the east. The Russians are saying they are attacking in the direction of Nevelske and Permovaiske, which is basically the southern part of the crescent around Avdiivka. Here we see Permovaiske and Nevelske. The attacks in this direction, I have not seen any proof that they were successful. And further along in the north, there were also reports about attacks. Some claims that they gained some territory. I cannot confirm it at this moment. And over the last few days, there have been reports repeating themselves again and again of attacks more or less along that line here. All of those attacks, the Russians claim they defeated, so those could be the recon attacks to identify weak points along the front that are in preparation of a bigger offensive that the Russians announced and like voiced that they fear the Ukrainians are going to attack fairly soon over the last few weeks. We still don't have any proof of that, but those attacks now are being reported. They seem to actually materialize, and that they are continuing there without gaining any ground would be an indication that this might be a preparation for a further offensive here. What we have here is we have from the southern front, we have some news along that line here. The reports are that the Russians are sending reinforcements to the whole front line. This is likely in reaction to the reports that the Ukrainians are preparing a counteroffensive. There have been reports of at least one T-90M that was filmed in this region firing at Ukrainian targets. We also hear that freshly mobilized soldiers arriving on the front line here to stabilize it, to help reinforce it. Along that line, we have reports about stronger traffic now being built up as the Russians have trouble getting the same volume over the Strait of Kerch. So now they are rerouting the traffic north through the land bridge they have conquered to reinforce Crimea and to supply Crimea and the Kherson bridgehead. Energoatom, that's the Ukrainian atomic energy company, says Russia has kidnapped on the 10th of October the deputy director of the Zaporizhzhia power plant here in Enerhodar. They say Energoatom says the deputy director is being tortured to get to force him to reveal information about workers from the power plant that are supposedly they should supposedly be forced to return to work in the power plant. I said this is an information by Energoatom, so as far as I know, state-owned company by an active war participant, and thus has to be seen within the adjusted within the within a grain of salt, with a grain of salt that is that has to be created out of, I'm sorry, my English is getting horrible right now. So it has to be seen with some grain of salt according to the situation. That was more or less what I wanted to say. I'm sorry. Getting tired already, I guess. Energoatom is also saying the Russians are bringing beds, heating devices, and regular household items to the nuclear power plant. We don't know what that means yet. That might mean they are setting up a winter camp, either for soldiers there, maybe to shield soldiers in the cover of the nuclear power plant, or that they mean to force the workers to stay in the power plant even while they're off duty, to prevent them from fleeing, to keep it running, like they did in Chernobyl, where they also forced the workers to stay in place when they captured it. The power plant is now reconnected to the electricity grid. It was disconnected again in between, but it's reconnected again. As I said in the past, this is important as the power plant is being shut down, or is shut down, but that doesn't mean the fuel rods are already cold. They are still producing massive amounts of heat that require active cooling, and thus electricity is needed to provide for that cooling. The Russians are claiming they defeated a 30-man strong sabotage element that was crossing the Dnieper reservoir to attack the nuclear power plant. We have no images, no image proof of that, and obviously any attack in that direction would be used by the Russians to claim it was an attack aimed at the power plant. But what we have proof of is that the Ukrainians have actually acted with special forces on that side of the reservoir. Only that what we don't have proof of is that they attacked the nuclear power plant. So it might actually be that the Russians are right in this time, that it's not propaganda, that they fought and forced a Ukrainian sabotage troop back with special forces that might have aimed at something else in that rough region here. The Ukrainian mayor of Melitopol, who is in exile right now, is saying that by now 700 citizens have been tortured by the Russians, either to force them to reveal information or to force them to keep working in the Enerhodar power plant, in the Zaporizhzhia power plant here, the nuclear power plant in Enerhodar. Again, has to be taken with the according grain of salt, but that's, yeah, we don't need to say more about that. We have proof of torture in this degree, but whether his number of 700 is actually correct or an exaggeration is obviously almost impossible for us to confirm. When it comes to Kherson, we have the usual reports about attacks on lines of communication, logistics, and command centers. There have also been new reports of attacks on the Antonivsky Bridge here in Kherson with HIMARS. And also we have reports about attacks with suicide drones. I have actually a video here where we see a Ukrainian Ram-2 loitering munition attacking an OSA air defense system. That is one of those air defense systems. That's one of those air defense systems that, if I'm not completely wrong, works with optical sensors, and is thus not necessarily in need of infrared targeting or visual or radar targeting, and can be used against small drones as well in this regard. But this was here attacked and destroyed by a loitering munition by the Ukrainians. When it comes to the front line here, we can take another look at the map from Riba we have here. We see the front line in the south is more or less stable in the last time. What we do have is that pro-Russian sources are saying from preparations for a continued offensive along the whole front line in the north. The pro-Russian Telegram channels report that. We don't see, I cannot obviously not confirm that from this point now. We also have reports from the Russian side, which are saying that the Ukrainians have attacked over the last 2 days, and it's more or less in this region here between Kostromka and Sadok. Not every time at the same town. Sometimes Kostromka, for instance, 2 days ago was not reported to be attacked, but it was reported yesterday to be attacked. So along these front lines are now smaller Ukrainian attacks. We can't obviously, it might be, if we look at the lines of communication, it would almost be, it basically jumps in our eye. We see it overly obvious that this would be an interesting point for a breakthrough towards Berislav to cut off those troops here to the east. But whether the Ukrainians are actually willing to take that risk to try it, that is something that is impossible for us to say at this very moment. That's it from Kherson already. Now let's come to the big news from the last days in Crimea. We have a report about an explosion in Tsarnoki. Here is one of the main railway hubs for the transport of supplies north into the occupied regions through, and of course Crimea is also occupied, but through the occupied regions and north into the occupied region. But there's also one Russian explanation that this might actually not have been an attack, either with some ballistic devices like a missile or something, or it might also not have been sabotage, because one Telegram channel is actually claiming that a tank that was there in repair, undergoing repairs, apparently had his barrel loaded and the gun fired mistakenly, and that was the noise and the detonation that was being heard. The bridge now, we have reports from the bridge that that they are no longer allowed to, the trucks are no longer allowed to go through, and that supposedly shows us some of the up to 900 trucks that are waiting here. They are waiting, if I see it correctly, we see that here on a airport that in the close vicinity that is being used to park all of them. We also have some satellite imagery of that should be the same as you could see with the concrete and everything. We see a huge number of trucks being parked there and incapable of moving over the bridge, as the ferry has nowhere close to the capacity to allow crossing it. Now we have reports from the bridge that repair works have begun. We see here that piece that fell down is apparently now being lifted, both with a crane from the bridge as well as with a crane on the barge. And there are satellite images also showing that which might also be interesting as they show that the workers are still on both lines of the track, and apparently that line cannot be used as of now as well. That at least would be the indication also of the blackening here, that it seems unlikely that the train, which was reported to have crossed the bridge, that it is currently running. Maybe it was run and they decided otherwise, but this surely doesn't look like current repair work that is going on. And I think that is supposed to be the ferry that is currently moving trucks. As we can see, the capacity of this is rather limited. We have now reports from Russia. Oh, here we have some video of the damage first. Let me show that. You can see the thin layer of concrete on the steelworks here. I am not an engineer, unfortunately, and I'm also not an explosive technician. Now, in the coming reports, you will hear numbers. You will see numbers in the tweets about explosive amounts, etc. I am absolutely not qualified to say that. I can say this was bigger than a hand grenade, but whether this can be done with 300, 200 kilometers of high-grade military explosive or in equivalent 3 tons of ammonium nitrate is unfortunately widely outside of my expertise. Also, when it comes to the damages, I can do some guesswork, but I'm pretty sure you're not here to hear my guesswork on a topic where I have hardly any competence, so I'll try to keep it down as much as possible in this regard. What we can see here is the bridge that fell apart, and this gap here was interpreted by some on Twitter as being the point where a army tactical missile system, the Attack-MS shot from a HIMARS, might have penetrated through and then detonated below it. Judge it for yourself whether you think that looks like a hole created, punched through with a missile. But let's just continue. You can see the damages here. You can pause the video later to see more details. Maybe in some regards, if you have the skill, you can enlighten us in the comments if you're a structural engineer to be able to judge the damages. But in some places here, for instance, we see the cracks in the concrete, which is an indication for the damage. But as said, unfortunately, not my field of expertise. You see here pieces as well that have broken. Now, from Russia, we have the interesting report about Russia basically published a line how it was done by a truck that exploded. I've seen a video and I showed it to you in one of the last situation reports, where it seems to me that the truck is not the source of the explosion. The whole area lights up before you see the truck, while you still see the truck in the background being fully in existence. So at least for me, that would be an indication that the explosion didn't start with the truck. Where it actually came from, I am unfortunately, again, I can do some basic comments, like when we see the railing move to one side, then obviously the explosion has come from the other side. Those are basic things that anyone with a rudimentary understanding from physics about physics can say. But when it comes to the details of the blast, unfortunately, I can just present to you some theories. My judgment on that is not decided yet. I am not convinced by any of the theories yet. I am not willing to say this was it as of now. So the news here are that the Russians are saying this is it was a truck that was a cargo that was initially set up in Odessa, so within Ukraine. The truck drove to the Bulgarian border through Moldova, very likely, probably through Romania as well. And then, yeah, it has to have driven through Romania, as Ukraine and Bulgaria don't share a common border. From Bulgaria, it went by ship. By the way, I will link that. All those links I'm showing you will be on the website a few hours after the video has been published. So if you want to read it up for yourself, you can find it on the website. That is linked in the description. So from Bulgaria, it was brought by ship to the Georgian port of Poti. From Poti, it supposedly drove to Armenia, and in Armenia, it was checked and all of this. We have some details here that some of them might actually be from the control. I'm summarizing it because you don't really need me to read it aloud to you. Probably it was sent through Armenia, as Armenia is part of the Eurasian Economic Union, and the idea would have been, if that shipment has already been stamped as okay by the Armenians, the Russians might not check on it further. From Armenia, it then went on into Russia, through Georgia again, through that border crossing in South Ossetia, where currently the big traffic jam should still be of Russians fleeing the mobilization. From there, it drove to closer to Ukraine, where it was stored for a while, I think for one day in a warehouse. And then it was a shipment, a delivery order was put up on a website, rte.su, where it was like put up for bidding, more or less, as I understand it. And some guy somebody took that offer within a few minutes for, what was it, $753 in return. And that's Mahir Yusubov, who is an Azerbaijan-born truck driver. He was then the driver in the truck who died. So you have the victim here is being given a face, as he is very likely the victim. It seems, if that's actually the driver, as said, most of this is coming from Russian sources, and that might be completely made up. But if that's the truth, then he was the driver, and it seems fairly unlikely that he even knew he was carrying a bomb. So that is giving one of the victims a face, because I think 3 civilians died in that explosion. He then he accepted the job, and then had his own truck being loaded with those with the cargo that originally, according to the Russians, came from Odessa over Bulgaria to Georgia, Armenia, Georgia, and then Russia. And he then slept a few hours and moved on at 5 o'clock. Originally, the delivery was meant to happen on the 7th of October, on Putin's birthday. But as he took a break and slept and then continued later, he crossed the what is it? He started at 5 o'clock, and on 5:52 he crossed onto the bridge, and at 6:03 his truck exploded. So that's the story the Russians give us. As said, they have arrested a lot of people, or at least they claim they have arrested a lot of people. That's the story, more or less, that they present to us. No way for me to confirm this. And here we have Hugo Kaman, which is supposedly a specialist on vehicle-borne IEDs, so on explosives, improvised explosives on trucks. And he is commenting on this. Here we're talking, for instance, about the 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms of explosive. No idea whether this is true. And he says here the blast marks says if it was a boat, the blast marks under it would be much more extensive. So this is supposedly was not a boat, and that only leaves a powerful vehicle-borne explosive, improvised explosive. He says the damages here show that the explosion was above the tarmac, not below it. And this is basically, he says that for him it is proven that the truck was the culprit. And here we have Chuck Farah, who unfortunately had some fairly optimistic and not quite true claims in the past. So he's well followed here, as you can see, 95,000 people. So he's a voice that is being heard. But for instance, he had shown Svatove to be under Ukrainian control, Svatove and Crimea, for, I don't know, a week or two, when the Ukrainians were still in Kupiansk. And as we see, they are still not even there yet. He says the damage supposedly shows that it's not a vehicle-borne IED, but that it's actually was an air blast from a missile coming from above that detonated before hitting the tarmac itself, an air blast. So that could have been an attack MS in this regard that was causing it. I'm presenting you with a few arguments now, but I said, it's unfortunately, I would love to tell you that this was it for this and this reason, but unfortunately, I'm reaching the limits of my understanding of this, so I'm not really able to explain to you and to give you a judgment on this. I can just present you the theories. That was it from the Kerch Bridge. We have some more information about the mobilization. Freshly mobilized Russian soldiers are still arriving on the front line. In Svatove, Russians took a video, mobilized people that 11 days ago they were mobilized and they are already on the front line. They barely have ammunition and they didn't receive any training. Their whole training was shooting 3 times, 3 single rounds. That was the whole training they received before that. And according to this is supposedly a video here from that region that is showing the capitulation of Russian soldiers that are giving themselves up. And as we can see, it does not appear that those soldiers were like captured, that they were surprised in a trench and then were forced to raise their hands. Because as you can see when the video is going on, not only is the situation not too tense, you see them not really in cover here, standing around the guy filming. And in a moment you might be able to see that there are, here you can see 3 more coming, deliberately choosing towards the Ukrainian, giving themselves up. Now, of course, we can't know if that is staged, which is always a possibility, but that would be an indication, and it would fit to the lack of morale that we expect from the freshly mobilized Russian conscripts, the fresh soldiers. From Rostov, we have reports that there is going to be a new mobilization being happening. It's unclear whether this is already a second wave of mobilization or whether Rostov has failed to reach its first goals and is now saying, oh, we haven't finished, so we need to do it again. This is unclear yet, but we have reports when it comes to the mobilization that it's being used to blackmail and to punish. And not only did we have the reports that counter-war Protestants were basically, after their arrest, handed them mobilization papers. In Magadan, there was the governor was talking to members of his staff, and somebody recorded it and then leaked the recording. And according to that, the governor is ordering the mobilization of the head of a gold mining company as revenge for the fact that this head of the company did not deliver the conscription, the mobilization papers to his workers. Other companies are reporting that they are being blackmailed. They have to hand over 10% of their workers for the mobilization, but in return they are promised that their best workers will be protected. So basically the companies are being asked to deliver 10% of their workers, to sacrifice them to save the rest. And obviously then the companies have to make the choice, which would then again be an indication how the mobilization works, that it's not by lists, by pre-prepared lists of people that actually receive training, but that people are just being sent there. There are also more reports about corruption. According to that, some recruitment workers and recruitment centers are now taking bribes from companies, and in return they stop the mobilization efforts inside of that company. All of this, where we see the reports about the mobilization, are that the claims by the Russian government are either not true or not being held up. We have reports all over Russia that people that supposedly should not be mobilized, either being protected from it or being unfit, are still being drawn into the armed forces and being put into uniform. When it comes to the support or the mobilization, we have further information here, and this supposedly is showing a plant, and this is a news that is going around, of T-62M that are being prepared to be sent into Ukraine. I'm not sure how loud you can hear that, but for me it's quite deafening, so I'm sorry for turning this off. As you can see, they are like this should be the engine block that is being disassembled and modernized here, or at least get back into working orders. All of this an indication that the Russians are pulling out the T-62s in big numbers now out of their storage to send them to the front line. The T-62M is not useless, but without modernization, obviously without laser rangefinder, without, I'm not sure, it might have, no, I think it actually has laser rangefinder, but what it doesn't have is thermal vision. It will not have modernized ammunition with the necessary penetration to justify the use of 4 soldiers, because T-62s now need loaders. They don't have autoloaders, so a 4th crew member is needed inside of those tanks. They don't have thermal vision, and they don't have new fire control systems. All of this not really showing the strength of the Russian armed forces, but they are trying to make up for it with numbers in this regard. The another report here is that the People's Republics, the so-called People's Republics, are now using D1 howitzers that were entering production. As you can see here, the shield, and you see the top here being visible, and it's clearly visible here as well. So supposedly those are the artillery pieces, 152 millimeters, but they were initially started in entering production within World War II. So this would be an indication the Russians are now to World War II era, at least World War II era artillery when it comes to the supply of their proxy forces. In political regards, we have reports from Kherson that the head of the occupation government wants to evacuate 40,000 children and their families there. They are supposed to be spread all over Russia. And then again, it comes from where you are leaning in this conflict, whether you call this a deportation or whether you claim this is to save the lives of the civilians because of the Ukrainian attacks towards the city of Kherson. I give you the choice how you want to judge that. But I'm pretty sure you are well aware that the claims are this is big-scale deportation and the attempt to Russify them, to force them to assimilate, to basically make up for the declining Russian demographics by more or less stealing Ukrainian citizens this way. When it comes to support, France has now promised Ukraine Krotal air defense systems. They are supposed to be delivered in the coming weeks. If those are the modernized versions, they are fairly potent short-range air defense systems that are still in use worldwide. So and France also has over 40 systems in reserve, which might also be delivered in some time. This will mean additional air defense for Ukraine. France has also promised the delivery of 3 M270. That's the tracked, to simplify it, the tracked version of the HIMARS. It's a tracked artillery system that has twice the tubes. In regards to the HIMARS, it is far less mobile, but it's better on harsh ground, but the firepower is also higher. But what the essential part of it is, it uses the same weapon system, the same ammunition, and thus can be somewhat compared with the HIMARS, even though it's far less mobile. Canada has promised 500,000 winter uniforms to be delivered. So when it comes to winter clothing within Ukraine, it will probably not going to be a problem if the Canadians hold up what they promised. And there were other promises in the last weeks too about much smaller amounts, but still of deliveries for winter clothing. We now have reports that the Javelin production is being increased to 4,000, not 40,000, to 4,000 a year. From initially, I think 1,900, more or less of it. So more or less, it's going to be doubled. I am not completely sure whether it was 1,900 or 2,100, but more or less, it's going to be doubled. Also, 10,000 freshly trained Ukrainian soldiers are now returning from UK, from Great Britain towards Ukraine, and UK is also giving Ukraine MRAMs for their NASAMS air defense system. NASAMS can fire regular air-to-air missiles, mostly MRAMs, but I think Sidewinders also work. And the MRAM then is in supply, is well stocked all over NATO partners, NATO members, and nations using NATO gear. So the amount of missiles being used for usage should not be a limiting factor when it comes to NASAMS, especially as older versions, as long as they still work, should be more than good enough to shoot down most of the cruise missiles the Russians are using as of now. Also, they are promising hundreds of air defense missiles. I cannot confirm whether those are manpads or whether it's for their Starstreak system, for instance, but at least they are promising hundreds of additional missiles and an additional 18 howitzers. And the last message I have is from, no, that's actually not it yet here. That's from Petro Poroshenko, the former president who has spent his own money to buy armored vehicles for the Ukrainian armed forces. And before we finish up, I have two interesting details here. It's more like entertaining than really important, but what we see here is a Russian soldier presenting himself. And what you see here are contact 1 ERAs, so explosive reactive armor. The goal of this is it has explosives inside, and when a shaped charge is hitting it, with the detonation, it either weakens the effect of the shaped charge or it equalizes it, basically making the shaped charge useless. But they are meant for tanks. They are not meant for a truck. This is explosives, and as we know from physics in high school, explosion creates pressure in all direction. It goes the way with the least resistance, but it still creates pressure in the other direction, and that is fine for a tank, because after a thick armor, the thick armor of a tank, that is strong enough so the explosion all moves the other way. But what we have here is more or less thin sheets of metal that are encasing the driver's cabin of that truck. Should those ERA get off, they will basically push the metal off the front into the driver's seats, and thus might actually make the situation far worse than if they have not been there. But that's not the first time we've seen it. We actually seen that throughout the war, that Russian proxies and Russian field modifications, we see ERA in huge numbers on trucks, on light armored vehicles, which don't seem to have the armor to support them and to justify the use, and which might actually make the situation worse. And here we have the first confirmed air-to-air kill, as it's being called, of 2 drones. Now this drone here is, I think that drone supposedly is Ukrainian, and the one we see right in front of it is Russian. And we saw that a piece flew away. And so supposedly this civilian drone is piloted by a Russian, has found the Ukrainian drone right in front of it and is trying to ram it to attack it, and by that destroying itself. At least that's the plastic piece we're seeing flying away, would indicate that it's probably going down. Something weird and special we haven't seen before, and that in my book justified showing it to you. That was it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the descriptions. Thank you very much for your support. And you can also support the channel by hitting the thumbs up to show the algorithm that you liked it, despite my English today being like a little bit like I'm drunk. I can just apologize for it once more. Comments are always helpful, especially not only to enlighten us, for instance, if you're a structural engineer, but also in regards to the algorithm. And other than that, obviously, if you haven't subscribed yet, I want to invite you to subscribe. Hit the bell button so you don't miss future videos, and don't forget to share the channel with your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it for now. Thank you very much, and I'll be back.